I've always been a bit of a loner. I prefer my own company to that of others, which is why I jumped at the chance to house sit for my aunt and uncle while they spent 3 months traveling through Europe. Their house is in a rural area about 30 minutes outside of town. No neighbors within shouting distance, spotty cell service, and blessed silence. For someone like me who works remotely as a graphic designer, it was the perfect setup. The house itself is a charming 2-story farmhouse that my uncle renovated himself. It has all the modern amenities inside while maintaining its rustic exterior charm. There's a wraparound porch, large windows that let in plenty of natural light, and a finished basement that my uncle converted into a home theater and game room. The first week was blissful. I set up my workstation in the sunroom, took long walks in the surrounding woods during my breaks, and enjoyed the peaceful evenings watching movies in the basement theater. I'd never felt more productive or at ease. It was during the second week that I first noticed something odd about the basement door. The door itself was nothing special, a solid wooden door at the end of the hallway leading from the kitchen. What caught my attention was that it was open about an inch when I came downstairs for breakfast one morning. I distinctly remembered closing it the night before after watching a movie. Must not have latched properly, I muttered to myself, pushing it firmly shut before making my coffee. I didn't think much of it until the next morning when I found it open again, this time by about 3 inches. A slight chill emanated from the gap, which was unusual since the basement was finished and typically maintained the same temperature as the rest of the house. I approached the door cautiously, an inexplicable sense of unease washing over me. "Hello?" I called down the stairs, feeling slightly ridiculous. Of course there was no answer. I closed the door firmly, making sure I heard the latch click into place. For good measure, I checked the lock, a simple push-button lock on the doorknob that I hadn't bothered using before. I pressed it in, confirming it was locked, then headed to the sunroom to start my workday. That evening, I decided to skip my usual movie night in the basement. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been growing throughout the day. Instead, I stayed upstairs, worked late on a project, and went to bed around midnight. I woke with a start at 3:17 a.m. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heating system, but something had pulled me from a deep sleep. I lay still, listening intently, when I heard it. A soft click followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slowly creaking open. The basement door. My heart began to race. I was alone in the house, miles from the nearest neighbor. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but the screen showed no service. Not unusual for this area, especially at night. I had 2 options: hide under the covers and hope whatever was opening that door wouldn't come upstairs, or investigate. Neither seemed particularly appealing. After a few minutes of internal debate, I decided I couldn't just lie there wondering. I needed to know. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat my uncle kept in the guest room closet. The wooden floor was cold beneath my bare feet as I crept to my bedroom door and peered into the dark hallway. From my position, I could see down the upstairs hallway, but not downstairs to where the basement door was located. I would need to walk to the top of the stairs to get a view of the main floor hallway. Each step I took seemed to make the floorboards creak louder than should be possible. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused, listening. The house had gone silent again. No more creaking doors or unexplained sounds. I slowly descended the stairs, bat raised and ready. When I reached the bottom, I could see down the hallway to the basement door. It was wide open. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response came from the darkness. I should have closed and locked the door again. I should have gone back upstairs, barricaded myself in the bedroom, and called the police when morning came and cell service returned. That would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, I found myself moving toward the open door, drawn by a need to prove to myself that there was a logical explanation, that I wasn't losing my mind. I stopped at the threshold, peering down into the darkness. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, which meant I would need to descend into the blackness to turn it on. This is how people die in horror movies, I muttered to myself. But I began to descend anyway, one cautious step at a time, keeping my back to the wall and the bat raised. When I reached the bottom, I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the wall. When I finally found it, I flipped it up, holding my breath. Nothing happened. The basement remained pitch black. A surge of panic rose in my chest. I flipped the switch up and down several times, but the lights didn't come on. Had the bulb burned out? Or was there a power outage affecting just the basement? I pulled out my phone and activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small portion of the basement. Everything looked normal. The large sectional sofa facing the projection screen, the pool table in the corner, the bar area my uncle had built along one wall. I swept the light around the room, looking for anything out of place, any sign of an intruder. Nothing seemed disturbed. Then my light caught something on the floor near the far wall, a dark stain that I didn't remember seeing before. I moved closer, the beam of light fixed on the spot. It looked like water? A small puddle had formed, seemingly seeping up through the concrete floor. That was strange. My uncle had mentioned that the basement was fully waterproof during the renovation, specifically to prevent any moisture issues. As I stared at the puddle, trying to determine its source, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The basement door at the top of the stairs slowly creaking closed. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls as I ran back to the stairs. By the time I reached them, the door had closed completely. I took the steps 2 at a time, heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the top, I grabbed the doorknob and turned it. It didn't budge. The door was locked from the other side. "No, no, no," I whispered, jiggling the handle frantically. This didn't make sense. The lock was a simple push button on the knob, the kind that could only be locked or unlocked from the hallway side. There was no way it could have locked itself when the door closed, unless someone else was in the house. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, even though I knew no one would hear me. After several minutes of this, I stopped, trying to think rationally. If someone had locked me in, why hadn't they come down to confront me? And if they were still in the house, making noise would only alert them to my location. I needed to find another way out. I remembered that there was a small window near the ceiling in the storage area of the basement. A window well that my uncle had installed during the renovation for emergency egress. If I could reach it, I might be able to squeeze through and get outside. I made my way back down the stairs, moving more carefully now, sweeping my flashlight beam across the basement. The puddle I had noticed earlier seemed to have grown larger, spreading across more of the concrete floor. And was it just my imagination? Or was the water moving? Not flowing exactly, but rippling slightly, as if disturbed by something beneath the surface. I gave it a wide berth as I headed toward the storage area at the back of the basement. The door was partially ajar, which struck me as odd since I hadn't been in there since arriving at the house. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the creak of the hinges. The storage room was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and holiday decorations. The window well was on the far wall, about 7 feet up from the floor. I began moving boxes to create a makeshift staircase, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that had settled in my stomach. Every few seconds, I would pause and listen, convinced that I could hear soft footsteps moving around upstairs. When I had stacked enough boxes to reach the window, I carefully climbed up and examined my potential escape route. The window was smaller than I remembered, maybe 2 feet by 1.5 feet, but I was slim enough that I thought I could squeeze through. I pushed against it, expecting resistance. To my surprise, it swung open easily, too easily as if it had been recently used. Cold night air rushed in, and I had never been so happy to feel a chill. I was about to hoist myself up and out when my flashlight beam caught something on the ground outside the window. Footprints in the soft earth, leading both to and away from the window. They looked fresh. Someone had been coming and going through this window. Recently. I froze, unsure what to do. If I climbed out, would I be walking right into danger? But staying locked in the basement seemed equally perilous. Before I could decide, I heard a splash from the main room of the basement. Not a drip or a trickle, but the distinct sound of something heavy hitting water. I nearly fell off my box tower in my haste to direct my flashlight toward the sound. The beam trembled as I pointed it through the storage room doorway, back toward the main basement area. The puddle had grown substantially, now covering almost half the basement floor. But what made my heart stop was the figure standing in the middle of it. A dark silhouette, humanoid but somehow wrong, its proportions slightly off. It stood perfectly still, facing away from me, water rippling around its feet. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The figure didn't move, didn't turn, didn't give any indication that it had heard me. It just stood there, water lapping at what appeared to be its ankles. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it an intruder? A hallucination brought on by fear and lack of sleep? Or something else entirely? I didn't wait to find out. I turned back to the window and began squeezing through the opening, no longer concerned about the footprints outside. Whatever was out there couldn't be worse than what was in the basement with me. The window was tighter than I'd estimated, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might get stuck halfway through. I wriggled desperately, feeling the frame scrape against my ribs as I pushed myself forward. With a final effort, I tumbled out onto the ground outside, landing hard on my side. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I ignored it, scrambling to my feet and backing away from the house. The night was clear and cold, the moon providing just enough light to see by. I looked around frantically, searching for any sign of another person, but the yard appeared empty. The footprints I had seen led away from the window toward the woods at the edge of the property. I needed to get help, but my phone was still in the basement where I'd dropped it during my panicked climb. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away through dense woods, and my car keys were inside the house. I circled around to the front of the house, hoping to find a door or window I could use to get back inside, preferably on the main floor, far away from the basement. All the doors were locked, and the windows were the modern, secure type that couldn't be jimmied open. As I stood on the front porch, shivering in my pajamas, I noticed something odd. The lights were on in the kitchen, lights that had definitely been off when I went to bed. I crept to the kitchen window and peered inside. Everything looked normal, undisturbed. No sign of an intruder. But the basement door, visible from my vantage point, was now standing wide open again. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down my spine. I watched, unable to look away, as the light in the kitchen flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging that part of the house into darkness. I backed away from the window, my mind made up. I wasn't going back inside, not tonight. I would walk to the neighbor's house, no matter how long it took. I had just stepped off the porch when I heard it, the sound of the front door unlocking. I froze, watching in horror as the door slowly swung open, revealing the dark entryway beyond. No one appeared in the doorway. The house seemed to be inviting me back inside. "No way," I whispered, backing further away. "No way in hell." I turned and ran toward the gravel driveway, intending to follow it to the main road. I had gone perhaps 50 yards when a sound stopped me in my tracks, the distant wail of a child crying. It was coming from the house. I turned back, staring at the open front door. The crying continued, soft and plaintive, drifting through the night air. It sounded so real, so genuinely distressed, that for a moment I questioned my certainty that I had been alone in the house. "It's not real," I told myself firmly. "It's a trick, a hallucination, something to lure you back." The crying grew louder, more desperate. Despite my fear, I felt a pull to investigate, to make sure there wasn't actually a child in danger. "This is how people die in horror movies," I repeated to myself, but I found my feet carrying me back toward the house anyway. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, still unwilling to cross the threshold. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped abruptly, The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the sound had been. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, came a response. Not a child's voice, but something older, raspier. "Come inside. I need you." That broke the spell. I turned and ran, no longer concerned with the driveway or the road, just desperate to put distance between myself and the house. I crashed through the underbrush at the edge of the yard, heading into the woods in the general direction I knew the nearest neighbor to be. Dawn was breaking when I finally stumbled onto a rural road. A passing truck driver spotted me, a wild-eyed woman in torn pajamas covered in dirt and blood, and called the police. The officers who responded were skeptical of my story, which was understandable. I could barely make sense of it myself. But they agreed to accompany me back to my aunt and uncle's house to retrieve my belongings and check for signs of an intruder. In the harsh light of day, the house looked perfectly normal. The front door was locked, not standing open as I had left it. When the police broke in, with my permission as I didn't have my keys, they found nothing out of the ordinary. No puddle in the basement, no sign of anyone having come through the window well, which was locked from the inside. The only unusual thing they noted was that the basement door was indeed locked, from the hallway side, just as I had described. But they attributed this to my own actions, suggesting I might have locked it myself and forgotten in my panicked state. I knew what I had experienced was real, but I couldn't prove it. I collected my essential belongings under police escort and checked into a motel in town, where I stayed until my aunt and uncle returned from their trip 2 weeks later. I never told them the full story, only that I had experienced some strange occurrences that had frightened me enough to leave. They were concerned but not alarmed, until my uncle went to check the basement. "That's odd," he said, frowning at the door. "This lock is new. I had a different doorknob installed here, one without a lock. I specifically didn't want anyone accidentally getting locked down there." I felt vindicated but also terrified anew. If the doorknob had been changed, someone had been in the house, altering things. But who? And why? My aunt suggested they call a locksmith to replace it, but my uncle, ever the handyman, said he would do it himself. I waited upstairs while he worked, still unwilling to go near that basement. About 20 minutes later, he called me down. He was holding the removed doorknob, examining it with a puzzled expression. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the mechanism. "This lock doesn't work the way you described. It can't be locked from the hallway side and unlocked from the basement side. That's not how these locks are built. If it's locked from one side, it's locked from both." I stared at the doorknob, a cold weight settling in my stomach. Then how was I locked in? How did I get out? He shook his head, unable to provide an explanation. Later that day, as I was preparing to leave, my aunt pulled me aside. "There's something you should know about this house," she said quietly, making sure my uncle was out of earshot. "Something happened here, long before we bought it." According to my aunt, the original farmhouse had burned down in the 1970s, claiming the lives of the family who lived there, except for the father, who had been away on business. The fire had started in the basement, where the mother and 3 children had apparently been trapped. When the house was rebuilt years later, strange occurrences were reported by the new owners, locked doors opening on their own, the sound of children crying, unexplained puddles of water appearing and disappearing. "We've never experienced anything like that," my aunt assured me. "In the 15 years we've lived here, it's been perfectly normal. That's why I didn't think to warn you. I always assumed those stories were just local folklore." I didn't tell her that the folklore had come to life during my stay. I didn't tell her about the figure standing in the water, or the voice that had called to me from inside the house. Some things are better left unsaid. I've done some research since then, trying to make sense of what happened. I found old newspaper articles about the fire, confirming my aunt's story. The official cause was listed as electrical, but there were rumors at the time that the father had been abusive, and that the mother had started the fire deliberately, choosing to take her own life and her children's, rather than return to his cruelty. I don't know if what I experienced was the restless spirit of that mother, still trying to protect her children from anyone who enters their space, or something darker, an entity that feeds on fear and uses the tragic history of the place as a lure. What I do know is that I will never set foot in that house again. My aunt and uncle continue to live there without incident, which only adds to the mystery. Perhaps whatever dwells in that basement only reveals itself to certain people. Or perhaps it was simply biding its time, waiting for the right moment to make itself known.